Hey everyone, in this video I want to discuss a topic that is frankly really under-discussed. And it has to do with app security. This is really relevant right now because we are generating a lot of code with these AI coding agents. And they are really good, but they may still make mistakes sometimes, just like human developers would. But the biggest effect of this as it relates to security is that you are not writing every line of code yourself anymore. So previously, if you wanted to change the code here, you would literally write it out yourself, or maybe with tab completion, but you would still have a really good idea of what you just wrote. And this is changing now, right? So now, very often we are delegating these tasks to a coding agent, and the coding agent is going to implement the code on your behalf. And I think this is going to be the trend. You're going to have some kind of coding agent, you're going to give them instructions on what to implement in the code, and they're going to do it on your behalf. And it has many benefits, but one downside I would say is that we do not have as clear of a picture of the actual implementation in the code as we had before. So we can generate much more code than before. However, it will put a lot more pressure on the review process, right? So before we actually push this into production, we need to really sit down and take a look at what we're actually merging into main, for example. That review step is going to become really big, and you've already seen a bunch of companies jump into this, and you're going to be hearing a lot about this. The review process in that stage is going to become a major point of attention. Now, especially security is related to that. You're going to be hearing these terms a lot. So ideally, we can do some scanning before we actually push it into production. Now, there are basically two main scans, I would say, that you want to do of your code. And actually, the SAST scan, SAST, static application security testing, that has to do with actually scanning your source code. So the code that you wrote or has been generated for you, are there maybe some glaring security issues in that? Maybe you've allows for a possibility of a cross-site scripting attack, an XSS attack, or maybe other kinds of attacks. So if we can scan our code for that, ideally automated, that could help us prevent shipping a security issue into production. Now there is also SCA, software composition analysis. So of course, we are generating code ourselves, but in many cases, you are actually relying on a third-party code. So code that other people have already generated or written, and you are using that as a dependency, right? So a lot of your apps will have actually a massive tree of dependencies. And those dependencies, that is also code that could contain security issues, right? So in JavaScript projects, we often have a package.json file that lists your dependencies. The important thing to understand is that those dependencies that you see here, they also rely on dependencies themselves, right? And those in turn also rely on dependencies themselves. So there's basically a whole tree of dependencies. So you can see in a package log.json, you can see that bigger tree here of those dependencies that your app is using. You can see it's a massive tree. So ideally we can also do that in an automated manner. Now to avoid issues, of course, mentally, we also need to have a clear picture of what our app actually consists of. So for example, what kind of AI models are we using, or what providers are we using, or other components of that AI stack, or other things in your code. So we ideally also have some kind of software bill of materials, basically a clear overview of the components that our app consists of. So I actually want to introduce you to Ment.io. They are also today's sponsor, but I've actually really come to enjoy using them because they've made it really easy to add that type of scanning to our deployment process. So for example, we can add it to our GitHub repository, and then it can automatically scan whenever we make a pull request, for example. So they are all in on becoming your AI-native app security partner. And they actually have some great use cases for why you want to use them. So those SCA scans, right? So your dependencies, honestly, dependencies are quite risky. You actually want to minimize the amount of dependencies you have. And actually you only want to use a dependency if you really need it. I see some developers that are quite eager to pull in third-party dependencies, but it's probably not a good habit. So we want to have some kind of scan that can help us detect issues with those dependencies. And that could be, for example, because you as a developer, you may have already detected that there is an issue with some component, and now you are responsible for fixing that. Or maybe you are leader of your developer team and you want to check that what your developers are pushing into the repository doesn't contain what they call high severity findings, right? So there could be smaller issues. We can decide a threshold, for example. We'll show you that in a second. Or license issues in the components that your team is pulling in, right? So SCA is for your dependencies, but more broader components. Could be an AI model perhaps, or other things that have a security issue. Maybe a RAG pipeline or an AI model. There are other things that could have security issues. Now about your own source code, of course, if you're a developer, you're committing something, you want to know if you've actually introduced some security issue, or you already have identified one and now you're trying to apply a fix. And you want to get some help to see if that has gone successfully. Or maybe you are team lead and you just want to have an additional check to see if what your developers are committing is actually safe. Now let me actually show you how it works. Let's say we have an app here, right? So we have a bunch of code. My app is using dependencies and it's using some AI components, right? So here we have OpenAI. We're using the GPT-4o mini model. So let's actually see what Ment can do with this. So I have pushed this to GitHub actually. So here I have a brand new repository and now I want to scan my code here with Ment. It's really easy. You just have to install the Ment GitHub application. Right, so here in the setup guide, they have a link here for Ment for github.com. It doesn't only work on GitHub, by the way. I'll show you some other places in a second. But here we can see Ment for GitHub, formerly called White Source, is a GitHub app that provides both that SCA and SAST scanning. Right, so for that SCA scanning, they support over 200 programming languages and they are continuously tracking open source vulnerability databases. And they also perform a scan of our own application source code, also for the 25 most used programming languages. Right, so I have already installed this GitHub application. After you have installed it, you need to pick the repositories that it should get access to. So here on the page here at the bottom, where there are permissions and repository access, I like to be a little bit selective here. So I will give it access to just these repositories, but you can also just do for everything. Let me save here. Now, as soon as I save here, and I basically give it access to the repository, if I now refresh on this repository, you can see that I have a new pull request actually. So Ment, as part of the setup, will try to merge a file into your repo. So this is the white source configuration file. That was the previous name, and it's basically just configuring how the scans should go. Right, so I will just merge this pull request into main, and now I have merged it. And actually, as soon as you merge this, it will actually start scanning your repository for the first time. And you can actually see that. So here on code, you can see now there is something going on here because we have a pending icon here. If we click on that, we can see there are actually two scans going on, the SCA scan and the SAST scan, and we can actually view the details of those. So here's the scan for the source code of our, right? So our own, you could say, proprietary code. And then here we have the security check for our for the components that we use. It could be third-party dependencies. All right, so after a few minutes, it is finished with scanning my repository here, and it actually found a few issues. So there are two scans here. We have the Ment security scan here, and this is basically telling us that there are a bunch of issues with the dependencies that we are using in our app. So you can see it found some vulnerabilities, and typically these vulnerabilities are disclosed and then also indexed in some database. So they are linking to the vulnerability that they have discovered. So for example, this one, if I open this up, I am directed here to the Ment.io vulnerability database. So you can see a little bit more about what this vulnerability means and some of the other related information about that. So in this case, I had some vulnerable libraries, right? So this is actually a major source of potential issues, the libraries that you're pulling into your app. So you really want to make sure that you really need it before you actually pull in third-party components or dependencies. Now it will actually also automatically open an issue for that. So you can see there are a couple of issues now. You do need to enable that on your GitHub repo. By default, I believe it is enabled, but in case you turn it off, Ment can automatically create these issues. So if I go here, you can see Ment has automatically created an issue here for my repo. And what I also really like is, of course, it doesn't only tell you what the problem is, it actually comes up with a suggested fix as well. So very often there is simply a higher version that you can upgrade to that should actually have fixed the issue. So that is for the components in your app. Now, what about your own source code? Well, it also has a Ment code security report. And in this case, it actually found one finding here, and we can actually view that in the Ment dashboard. So they also have a dashboard for you when you sign up. So just to show you that here, you can see under applications, it will list all the, well, in this case, repos that you have connected. In my case, because I only have been using GitHub repo with Ment, I have 6 applications here. Now the one that I'm showing you in this video is the YouTube Ment application, right? So if I scroll a little bit here, you can see there were a couple of issues with dependencies and one in my own code. And if you have containers, by the way, you can also scan those. So I have a nice overview of that here. If I click on it, we will get some more details. So you can see there were 2 scans and it has 10 total findings, some really important ones, right? So here we have scans. There were 2 scans, one for our source code, one for dependencies. If I scroll here a little bit, we can see for each one what the issues are. So it actually, you can also see how many lines of code it scanned, how many files. And it found one high for our actual source code. So let's actually see if we can find that here as well. So we have security, dependencies, but now our actual own code. Let's take a look. So here it found that one issue, and it is a TypeScript application. And if we open that up, it actually found a code injection issue. So if I open it up, we can see the issue in the actual code here. So here I have a button that will actually try to run that can be, well, you could say arbitrarily injected here. So there is there's a possibility here of a code injection attack, right? So really nice catch here by Ment. Of course, you always have to check yourself and see if you can already spot these issues yourself. Of course, ideally, as soon as the code has been generated like this, you can immediately fix it yourself. But it's just a great help to have Ment.io also look over your shoulder and also help you detect these issues. Right, so there's also a description here about this code injection issue. And so for a lot of these issues, they have been documented already. So there are a couple of more common issues that you may run into. And so typically there is already a description and a remediation recommendation, right? So how you can actually make it better. A lot of these are actually described here on the OWASP website. So you can find that here as well. All right, now what else do we see here? Well, we also discussed that software bill of material, basically an overview of the components that your app consists of. So here we see OS inventory. So you can see here it has found 65 open source components that my app is using. It has a description here. And actually they also talk about a license risk, right? So you cannot just use other packages, right? So you need to look into the license. And here under AI, we see AI specific components. So in this case, I was using the OpenAI SDK, and we can even see specifically which library or model. In this case, I was using the GPT-4o model. And so we get observability for this as well. And so maybe you were tracking this in some Excel sheet or something like that. Well, I would prefer using this. Right, so here under issues, we can see some of the issues that Ment has opened. And the nice thing is it will actually automatically create pull requests as well to fix some of these issues. So here, for example, it wants to merge into my repo this upgrade for the package. And I can actually just merge that and it should actually fix this issue. So if we do that, successfully merged and closed. Let me quickly do that for the other ones as well. All right, so now I have merged those suggested pull requests. So let's actually first pull the changes that we just made on the GitHub repo locally here. And actually I'm using the Ment VS Code extension here as well. So it will actually automatically try to detect issues when you do certain things. I'll show you more about this in a second. All right, so now I opened the file here where we have that code issue. So let's actually create a new branch. Let's call it fix eval issue. And here we will just make a change here. Okay, so I made the change here locally. I staged all the changes and I made a commit here and I pushed this as a new branch to the GitHub repo. And now here on GitHub, I want to merge that new branch into main. So I created a pull request to merge this from this branch into main. And now the nice thing is before we actually accept that, we can have Ment here scan again. So we have an additional set of eyes here before we actually merge this into main. You can see it has already started scanning. We just have to wait a few minutes. Now about when it will scan, there is this white source configuration file. So here there are some settings, right? So you can decide, for example, when you want this scan to happen or not happen, or what type of files, for example. So there are a couple of settings that you can set here. It's all very well described in documentation, but you can fine tune this workflow to really fit your needs. All right, so here we go. The code security check has now detected no findings, so that is good news. Now I feel more confident that I indeed fixed the issue, so I'm pretty happy merging here. All right, there we go. Ment helped me detect an issue. And now also when I fix the issue, Ment also helps me confirm that it actually was fixed properly. Now, Ment does not only work on GitHub or other remote repository solutions, it actually also works inside your IDE. So they actually have an MCP server, which I have enabled here, and it contributes one tool here, the Ment Code Security Assistant. So as we're generating the code, we can have an additional set of eyes here from Ment to see if it can perhaps detect an issue with the code that was generated. Right, so I have opened the app in here again, and let's actually ask the agent here to implement a text area on the page that allows users to write a simple script that then gets executed on the page. And so this is potentially a type of query that could have some security aspects to it that we want to double check. And again, of course, we have to check it ourselves, but it's really nice that we can have an additional set of eyes here. So we can say, use Ment to check for security issues with your solution. Right, so let's see what it can do here. Just planning the implementation here. And you can see it's already talking about Ment SAST scanning. You can see SAST tool. And now you can see it has generated to-dos. So you can see it has properly added this Ment scan as part of that actually at the end. So it can double check to see if it's safe. All right, so after a few seconds, it was finished with that. Now it wants to run the Ment tool here. So it asks me for permission. Of course, I can decide to run everything automatically. And we can see the parameters here. So it wants to check that file that it just updated. So I will run this. And let's see what happens. All right, so after a few seconds later, it is actually finished with the task completely. You can see it has checked off the Ment SAST scan as well. Okay, so it has made some updates here on the page, and it has done some security hardening. It actually mentions note, the Ment scan correctly flags new function as an eval sync. So it actually has gotten some feedback from Ment, which it has then incorporated here into the response. So this is really nice because an agent can then automatically self-improve by getting feedback from Ment as well. So actually here it displays Ment SAST results. So it found a particular typical security risk here for new function. It knows about this now, so the agent can then decide what to do with that. Right, so really nice to have this inside the IDE, right? Especially as we're generating a lot of code here with an AI. It's nice that we can immediately have a security scan here as well. Even before you commit anything, before you even get to GitHub or your other remote repository places, inside the IDE, we can already have a double check here as well. So that's really nice. There is also the Ment Advice extension here. So in that case, if you install that, you can actually scan certain folders. So here I did right click on source. I can scan the folder with Ment Advice, for example. And in this case, it didn't find any security issues. But the point is, it's not only on GitHub, it can already work inside your IDE, inside the places where you already work. And you can find everything that they offer. So there is actually also a Renovate option here. You may actually know that already. So it helps you with automatically updating your dependencies, right? So it can automatically create a pull request, for example, on GitHub, and it can suggest incrementing a dependency version, for example. Right, so maybe you've actually already used that. Well, that is part here of Ment.io as well. We've looked at SCA and SAST. Now, if you're using containers, that is part of here as well. And of course, we want to see the components that our apps consist of. So we want to have clear visibility of our components, and particularly AI components, so models, but can be other libraries or a RAG pipeline. There can be other components inside your app, and we want to see what we are actually using in there. So I would say check them out. You can find a link in the description. In any case, thank you for watching. Hope this helps you out with securing your applications. Have a nice day, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.